Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to take a second here before we get started. There's some people entering the room, and then we will get going in about 1 minute. Okay, everyone. So good afternoon. My name is Steve Jurch, and I'm the Associate Vice President of the Center for Policy and Practice at ACCT. Thank you for joining us for this discussion today to talk about some research around labor market outcomes for short-term workforce training programs in community colleges. We are excited to share this work with you as it's very relevant to the recently enacted Workforce Pell legislation. This webinar is a part of a series on various aspects of non-credit programs and data, so stay tuned for upcoming events. Before we get started, I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this session, and the recording will be sent to the registrants as well as posted on our website. I will be monitoring the chat function, so if you'd like to ask a question, we will have time for Q&A at the end. Please use that chat function on your screens. So as employers continue to voice concern about difficulties finding a trained workforce that meets their needs, the labor market needs have shifted to a more frequent, ongoing skill development approach. Shorter-term, industry-recognized credential-based programs have gained momentum as a possible solution to bridge the gap between post-secondary education and labor market demand. These programs tend to be flexible and can quickly adapt to the evolving workforce demands and employer needs. While these credential-based programs have been around for a while and are continuing to grow in popularity, questions around quality and value are more frequently discussed. In addition, there has been little research conducted on the economic benefits of these credentials in the labor market, along with the composition of the program participants, program success, and industry credential attainment rates. So today, we are going to hear about some research that was done on an initiative launched in Virginia that is an innovative pay-for-performance funding mechanism to expand participation in community college non-credit workforce training programs that lead to an industry-recognized credential in one of several high-demand fields that is identified by the Virginia Workforce Board. This initiative, known as FastForward, offers these short-term workforce training programs in a variety of fields that typically run between 6 and 12 weeks and further lead to an industry-recognized credential if students successfully pass a credential-specific exam. So to talk about her research, we are joined today by Dee Zhu, who is a professor in the School of Education at UC Irvine and the faculty director of UCI's Post-Secondary Education Research and Implementation Institute. Her current work focuses on innovations and policies aimed at broadening higher education access for students from diverse backgrounds and improving their academic and labor market outcomes, including workforce training programs spanning both for-credit and non-credit sectors. Dee is part of a larger initiative through the Non-Credit Research Collaborative at Rutgers University, along with Michelle Van Noy, Mark D'Amico, and Peter Barr. So before we get into the research, I want to turn it over to Michelle, who is the director of the Education and Employment Research Center and has more than 20 years of experience conducting research on education and the workforce focused on credentials, community colleges, and connections between higher education and the labor market, to talk a little bit about the work that EERC is doing. And so, Michelle, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Let me get my slides up here just real quick. It's great to get a chance just to share briefly about some of our broader work here. Dee is really the star of today's show, but I just wanted to spend a minute to talk and let everybody know about some of the collaborative efforts that Dee, Mark, and Peter and I have all been engaged in through the Non-Credit Research Collaborative, which is an effort that EERC is housing. I'll spend a bit of time just sharing about that a little bit later, but just to give you some background on EERC, in case you haven't run into our work, we've been doing a lot of work around non-credit education and non-degree credentials, looking at quality and data and a variety of things. But we also look at student pathways, like Steve said, and looking at connections with the labor market. We have spent a lot of time working with community colleges over the years on research and evaluation. And we've also spent a good amount of time looking at technician programs at community colleges. So we have a variety of resources just to point you to on our website, just to give you a sense of some of the things that ERC has been working on. One of those projects that has formed some of the basis for our work in sharing out research with ACCT and also was what brought together the four of us researchers, Dee, Peter, Mark, and myself, is the State Non-Credit Data Project that Rutgers EERC has been leading. And that's a project really to help us understand the non-credit data infrastructure around the country and to document what states are doing and the data that are available. We went to states that had data. We looked at the data, we described it, and we've been working on a national data taxonomy to help guide efforts around building up the non-credit data infrastructure within community colleges within states across the country. So through that, we also have some opportunities for learning and sharing of practice through our quarterly learning community, which is meeting next on March 9th, as well as through specialized working groups for state folks only that are led by state folks trying to share practices with each other. So it's a big project. I'll put the website in the chat for those who might be interested in learning more about that if you haven't heard about it. But the non-credit research collaborative, I think, is really what's bringing us together today, and has been a very exciting effort, like I said, between the four of us who have all been working in this area of non-credit research within the community college sector for decades now. So we've sort of been watching everybody become interested in this topic, and for those who are have been steeped in the community college world, we know this is not a new topic. This is something that has been salient for quite some time, and so we have our non-credit research collaborative to really help showcase the work that the four of us have done over the years and highlight this work as as the field is really urgently trying to look towards research to help guide practice. We're hoping to just make our resources available. So that's why we have the noncreditresearch.org website to centralize those research and information and just provide a resource when people have questions or looking for research. We want that to be a resource to help guide practice. And that's really what we're all dedicated to doing, is to do research that can help guide practice. So I'm going to stop talking and stop sharing and turn things over to Dee, who has some really exciting and wonderful research that she's been doing on outcomes in Virginia that I think will be very illuminating. So
Thanks, Michelle. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to hear about this because I know FastForward has been in topic of conversation for a long time. And so, I've always wondered the answer to these questions, and now we're about to find out. So, Dee, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Let me see if I successfully share the screen. Does it look okay? Or maybe it seems something is cut, so I can put it on the other screen to see if it would be better. Can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you, Michelle, as well for that introduction, and thank you all for being here today. It's really a great pleasure to share this work with you because community colleges, and especially workforce programs, are really at the center of this conversation nationally right now. So as Steve mentioned, there is a lot of interest in short-term workforce training, especially with Workforce Pell and other major investments. But at the same time, there are still important questions about the value of these programs, especially when it comes to labor market outcomes. So today I'm going to share evidence from Virginia that helps us better understand one key question. Do these short-term non-credit workforce training programs and the industry recognized credentials associated with these programs actually translate into meaningful economic gains for students? And what can that tell us about the role of community colleges in promoting economic mobility? So I want to mention that this work is part of a larger collaborative effort involving an exceptional team of scholars from multiple institutions, and it has been generously supported by several federal and philanthropic agencies. This is part of our ongoing research agenda, as Michelle mentioned. So your feedback and perspectives will be incredibly valuable in helping shape the next phase of this work. So let me start with the big picture. One thing we hear consistently from employers, from policymakers, and from community college leaders is that there is a persistent gap between the skills employers need and the skills workers currently have. This pattern has been reflected in the national data. So here in this figure, I plot two national series over time. Job openings in green and unemployment rate in red from 2016 through 2025. What is striking here is that in the last 10 years, except for the pandemic periods, those two lines are actually very close to each other. So in other words, we have nearly as many open jobs as we have people looking for work. So this suggests that the challenge is not simply a lack of workers, it's really a skill mismatch problem. Employers have positions available, but they need workers with specific job-ready skills. And that's exactly why short-term workforce training and industry credentials have become such an important focus for community colleges. These programs are designed to be faster, more flexible, and more directly connected to the labor market needs. Several states have, in the past few years, enacted legislation to fund targeted short-term workforce training programs, and most of them cover both credit and non-credit sectors. So a lot of these short-term programs prepare students for industry-recognized credentials. These credentials are awarded by third-party organizations, not by the colleges itself, and they certify competencies for specific occupations. Here I list some of the popular examples. They include certified medical assistant in healthcare, welding certifications in manufacturing, CDL in transportation, CompTIA in IT. So those are popular programs offered by many community colleges nationwide. According to a recent report in 2023, industry credentials are actually the most common credential type among WIOA eligible workforce programs, which is the major federal pipeline for workforce development funding. So given the very fast increase of short-term workforce training and the industry credentials associated with those programs, what do we know about economic returns to earning an industry credential? So we know quite a bit about returns to sub-baccalaureate credentials in the current literature awarded through credit-bearing programs. There is also a small but growing literature on non-credit training itself with mixed findings. But when it comes specifically to industry-recognized credentials, especially those awarded outside the credit system, there is surprisingly little evidence. And a big reason for that is data limitation. So these industry credentials, because they are awarded by the third party, they usually do not show up in the higher education administrative records. So it has been very difficult to track student credentialing outcomes and labor market performance. So even with thousands of millions of investments into those programs, and even this credential has become so popular among those programs, we have surprisingly very limited evidence about whether these programs indeed help students move into an industry, get a job, and the payoff of those investments. So that's where the Virginia context becomes extremely valuable. In 2016, Virginia launched a major statewide initiative called the Workforce Credential Grant. The goal of this grant is to expand non-credit workforce training programs that would lead to industry-recognized credentials in a high-demand field. The programs supported by the state funding are called FastForward programs, which Steve briefly alluded to. They are offered at all of the community colleges in Virginia. Importantly, the Workforce Credential Grant used a very unique pay-for-performance funding model, which I will explain in 1 minute, that leads to the collection of detailed administrative data that allow us to track student credentialing and labor market outcomes over time. So building on this data, we try to understand two key questions. The first one is, who enrolls in FastForward programs? We want to know what are the characteristics of students these programs are serving. Do they seem to overlap with the type of students enrolled in credit-bearing programs? So do they seem to be complementary, or are they seem to be competing with the students currently served in those credit workforce training programs? And we're also interested in knowing what are the program completion rate. Do students seem to complete these programs? What are the subsequent credentialing rates? Do they serve as a springboard for further education for credit sector? So those are the questions about just knowing more about these short-term non-credit workforce training programs. We're also interested in understanding the labor market benefits of industry credentials through the FastForward programs. So what would be the overall returns to earning those industry credentials? Do we see substantial heterogeneity across different fields of study? And if we do see some benefits associated with the industry credentials, what could be some mechanisms driving these benefits? We're also interested in understanding what is the overall returns to the training program participation versus getting the credential on top of the training. And finally, whether it seems to be a cost-effective program compared to some of the other workforce training programs available at community colleges. So here are some brief descriptions of the FastForward programs offered in Virginia. These programs are designed to be extremely short, so typically about 6 to 12 weeks. Within that very short period of time, students will be able to go through the program, and the goal is to help students quickly gain the skills and then enter the workforce. Each program would lead directly to a third-party industry-recognized credential, such as a commercial driver's license, certified nurse aid, or welding certification. And importantly, these programs are not created in isolation from the employers. Local employers are often closely involved in the design of these programs. Some of the programs also have guaranteed internships with the local employers to make sure that the training is well mapped to the local labor market need. So this map shows the distribution of FastForward programs across Virginia's community colleges. Actually, every community college now offers some types of FastForward programs. The state has made it very easy for students to find and enroll in these programs. So there is a centralized website where students can see what programs are available, where they are offered, and whether they are currently open for enrollment. So one unique aspect, as I briefly mentioned, of the FastForward program is that they are funded through a cost-sharing model among the state, the students, and the training institution, where the specific amounts of funding each party pays is based on student performance. So if a student complete a training and earn the industry credential associated with that program, then the student pays only 1/3 of the cost, and the state pays the remaining 2/3 to the training institution. But if the student complete a training but does not earn the credential, the student still pays just 1/3 of the tuition, but the state pays only 1/3 to the training institution, and the college would absorb the remaining 1/3. So that would be equally distributed between the state, the student, and the training institution. However, if the student does not complete a training, then the student is responsible for 2/3 of the cost, and the state does not provide any types of funding. So this structure creates very strong financial incentives for both the students and institutions to focus on program completion and credential attainment. So just a very brief summary of the data we used for all of the results I'm going to present in the subsequent slides. We focus on our analysis on students from the 2016, which is the inception of the FastForward programs, through 2021 cohorts. And we made a few sample restrictions that I won't go into detail, but those are common sample restriction used in the labor economics literature. The final analytic sample includes more than 750,000 earnings records for approximately 26,000 individuals. So the first set of questions intend to understand the FastForward student characteristics and their academic outcomes. So first, we found that FastForward programs attract and enroll a very different segment of the population than credit-bearing CTE programs currently available at community colleges. Here, the orange bars in this figure shows the percent of FastForward students enrollments by subgroup population of students. To put these numbers into context, the dark blue bars show the percent of student enrollments in short-term credit-bearing certificate programs within Virginia VCCS system. These are the programs that are also focused on career technical training and typically require 1 year or less to complete. So right now, this represents one of the shortest workforce training in the credit-bearing sector within Virginia. So kind of like comparable to the workforce training offered through the non-credit FastForward programs. The results indicate that the FastForward programs, they enroll a substantially higher share of male students, Black students, and older students. So from a post-secondary education access perspective, non-credit programs like FastForward seems to provide an important alternative pathway to skills and workforce opportunities for populations traditionally underrepresented in the credit-bearing sector. In addition, we found that the program completion and industry credential attainment rates are quite high in FastForward, likely driven by the financial incentives embedded in the pay-for-performance funding model. The FastForward programs have an exceptionally high completion rate of 95%. And in more recent years, this number has increased to 99%. So almost everyone enrolled in these FastForward programs completed the program. In addition, more than 2/3 of the students further received an industry-recognized credential within 6 months of program completion. So again, to put these numbers into context, less than 1/3 of students enrolled in the short-term certificate credit-bearing program at VCCS during the same time earned a college-awarded certificate within 2 years of initial enrollment. So again, those are very different types of programs, different types of population enrolled in them. I provide this just to give you a context about how credit-bearing short-term programs offered in the credit-bearing sector within the same system has been doing in terms of completion and the credentialing rate during the same period of time. So finally, one goal policymakers often have for non-credit programs is for them to serve as a potential springboard to earn additional credits and credentials in for credit programs. However, our analysis suggests that most students do not appear to approach FastForward in this way. This figure shows that more than 60% of FastForward students have no prior or subsequent enrollment in the credit-bearing sector, and only fewer than 14% of FastForward enrollees pursue subsequent training in the credit-bearing program. One interesting finding is that roughly 1/3 of the FastForward enrollees had prior credit-bearing enrollment But among these individuals, only 20% of those students earned a degree or a certificate from this prior enrollment. So this suggests that FastForward programs may provide a pathway to training and industry credential for students who were not successful in the credit-bearing side. So next, we turn to our main question, right? So what are the labor market returns to FastForward participation and the industry credential associated with those programs? So let me briefly explain what we're doing here. So in this analysis, we examined how students' earning change after participating in the FastForward program. In particular, we look at quarterly earnings before and after training, and we compare those changes separately for students who earn the industry credential and those who didn't participate in the training but do not earn, who complete the training but did not earn the credential. So this allows us to answer two related questions. The first one is, what are the earnings gains associated with FastForward participation overall? And the second, to what extent are those gains driven specifically by earning the credential itself on top of completing the program? So here, this figure shows the estimated returns to earning an industry credential. So again, here, the comparison group are individuals who completed the training but didn't receive the credential. So whatever gains we're seeing here is closely tied to earning an industry credential on top of completing a program. So given that we have already completed the program, what would be the additional value of receiving an industry credential? So what we see here is before the program exit. So I have here indicating on all of the estimated results on the left, those two programs are very similar in terms of the earnings trajectories. So they are hovering around zero before the program exit. But after they completed the program, remember the credential earners that would receive the credential, but people who complete the program but didn't receive the credential, they would also enter the labor market. But if you compare their earnings records, we see a fairly sharp jump in terms of their earnings gaps, which is roughly $800 per quarter. This represents roughly a 10% increase from average pre-enrollment earnings. So in other words, among all of the individuals who have completed training, if you further receive an industry credential, that credential would bump up your earnings by about 10% or $800 per quarter. So next we examine how these returns would be different for overall program participation returns would be different for people who received the credential and the people who didn't receive the credential but completed the training. So what we see here is participating in the FastForward program without earning a credential, which is shown in column 2, is associated with meaningful earnings gains. Even among students who complete the program but do not earn the credential, their earnings still increase significantly. So there is clear value to participating in the training. So they, depending on the specific model used, it increased their quarterly earnings by between $250 to $440. So it's a decent increase and it's significant. However, the gains are substantially larger for students who earn the industry credential. So if we look at their overall program participation and compare their earnings trajectories before versus after, for those who earned industry credential, their overall, the returns to program participation is around more than $1,000. Depending on the model, it ranges between $1,000 to about $1,150. So the main takeaway here is that while workforce training itself improves earning the industry credential really plays a critical role in unlocking the full economic benefits of these programs. So if we compare between the overall returns to program participation between the credential earners and the non-credential earners, the additional earnings gain associated with earning the credential on top of program participation is about $700 per quarter, which is aligned with the estimate that we just saw. So next, we examine how these returns vary across different fields of study. We find that the returns differ substantially across fields, with some of the largest gains observed in transportation and healthcare. But an important takeaway from this figure is you can see that no matter which field we're looking at, the industry credential is associated broadly with positive returns. So in other words, the average returns, positive returns associated with industry credential is not driven by a particular field. It seems to be valuable across a variety of fields, even though there are substantial variations in the specific value across those fields. So we also examine how the returns, what could be the potential mechanisms driving those returns. So here on this slide, I'm showing what is the primary industry a student was employed before versus after they complete a credential. So what we're seeing here is before the student receive the industry credential, they are largely employed in industries like accommodation and food, retail, trade, administrative services, which are associated with overall lower average earnings. But upon their completion of the program and receiving the credential, we see a dramatic drop in terms of their employment in those fields and a corresponding increase in fields like healthcare, transportation, construction, and manufacturing, which are the targeted fields by the FastForward program. And these are all high demand fields that have been increasing really quickly in Virginia and also nationwide. Right. So one important mechanism seems to be that these FastForward programs and industry credentials successfully help individuals to switch into industries that have really high local demand. So finally, we also conducted a cost effectiveness, very brief analysis, right, to compare FastForward with other workforce training programs. The main takeaway is we find that FastForward program is highly cost effective related to many other workforce training investments. In about less than 1 year, the benefits associated with the FastForward program would exceed the cost for the students. So then what are some of the implications that we can draw from our work? First of all, what we see here is short-term workforce training programs like FastForward can indeed serve as a meaningful pathway to economic mobility. As you can see, no matter if students receive the credential or not receive a credential, we see real earnings gains after they exit the program. However, it seems that a credential attainment plays a critical role in driving these earnings gains. So this has very strong implications for states that are offering similar type of programs. How can we design the programs and provide student services and support in a way that would really promote the industry credential completion rates? Finally, because FastForward serves students who often do not pursue traditional degree programs, it can have the potential to expand access to workforce opportunities among the traditionally underrepresented groups in the higher education sector. So for those who are interested in learning more about this work, we have a working paper that provides additional details on the analysis and findings. And I have put the link here for people to access the paper. We have a number of ongoing work based on the findings from the current study. The first one is we would want to identify program features that are linked to better outcomes. So as you can see, despite the very strong program completion rates, the credentialing rate, it's still high, but there is a gap between program completion rate and the credentialing rate. So what can institutions do to further improve the credentialing rate among the program completers? We also have a study that tried to compare the non-credit versus the credit programs for the same industry credentials. One interesting observation we had in Virginia is some of the credit-bearing programs are also targeting industry credentials. So then this raises an important question for both the institution and students. So if there are different ways of designing these programs that are targeting the same credential, what are the trade-offs of enrolling or offering one versus the other? We're also interested in understanding directly about employers' perceptions of those industry credentials. So we're conducting an audit study and also qualitative interviews with local employers who are connected to those FastForward programs to understand how they see the value of the industry credentials and how just the individuals perform on site once they transition, right, from the FastForward program training into the companies. We are also collaborating with MDRC to conduct a series of qualitative data collection to investigate student bottlenecks and the potential interventions we can design to help address the barriers and improve the success rate of completing the credential. So there could be a variety of factors that prevent students from receiving the industry credential, and we are trying to identify them and then design interventions to address those bottlenecks. And finally, we're also conducting a large-scale policy analysis, trying to understand how this performance-based funding influences the supply of skilled workers. So this might provide some information for other states that are also contemplating using similar incentives to promote supply of skilled workers to address the local labor market need. So that's the end of my presentation, and love to hear any thoughts or feedback from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dee, and thanks, everyone. We have already some questions coming in to the chat or the Q&A, but I have a couple that I want to ask first, and some of them we may answer some people's questions. So the first question I have, and that information was fantastic. I mean, I think FastForward has been looked at as a model for or comparison to other performance-based funding models. I mean, you look at the similarity around the vetting and the completion and the delivery, and you look at how Workforce Pell is being rolled out. You look at House Bill 8 in Texas around their performance-based funding models. And so, I think a lot of other states are looking at moving to that. So I think this research is critical to providing some really good information around that. So one thing I want to ask is, and coming from a workforce development area at a community college and running some programs that included all of the wraparound services, because there was a very high success rate for completion in these programs.
That's right.
And we definitely found that the more interventions that we provided for the students to help them with those wraparound services, the better they did. Do you know if FastForward had those in any wraparound services built in or other student supports that maybe contributed to that high completion rate?
That's an excellent question, Steve. So one thing I would like to highlight is the performance-based model, funding model here plays a really important role. So if you look at the program completion rate, really the student receive a very strong financial incentive to complete a program. So I think the program completion largely is driven and is closely associated with this very well-designed performance-based model. But on top of that, I completely agree with you that wraparound services will be really critical, especially when it comes to the credentialing rate, right? So because there is no direct financial incentive for them to complete a credential, but still the credentialing rate is 70%. So one thing I didn't have time to show is that we also look at the credentialing rate across different institutions for the exactly same training program. For example, health, medical science assistant, we would see substantial variations across institutions. So some of the institutions could be fairly low and some of the institutions could be extremely high. So what could be some of the factors driving those variations? And as you mentioned, the wraparound services and the alignment with local employer could play an important role. Some of the things we have observed is one is to waive provide testing related services, or really just reminding people about the test to take the test and get a credential, why this is really important. Some of the programs waived the testing fees, and the testing fee could range, widely between $40 to $150 for these students. This is a real cost, right? So whether that type of support is offered to the student could make a difference in terms of where and whether they would register for the credentialing test. And there has also been career counseling services offered by some of the colleges, and providing support in connecting students to future employers that could make a big difference in terms of whether students get a credential and whether they transition really smoothly to the labor market. And finally, the employers are closely involved in the FastForward program, but if you look across different training institutions, there are substantial variations. So in some of the training programs, employers might be included in a committee to provide guidance regarding the curriculum. But in some of the other programs, the employer might play a much bigger role, where there will be guaranteed internship in certain local companies. And that provide very different signals to the students in terms of the future job opportunities. So I think all of those different kind of services, support, and design features would be really important, right, for future research to look deeply into and identify potential things that could potentially be scaled up across those workforce training programs.
No, that's really great to hear. I know a while ago it was all we need to do is provide free tuition, right? And the students should take these programs and be successful. And what we're seeing and what we continue to see is that shift to, like, you have to address all the needs of the student, and it's not just about the waiving the tuition piece. And so you mentioned the role of the employer, the tie-in with the employer in the region, and I'm wondering, it doesn't happen overnight, but I do know that, regional economic needs shift, right? I think, so can these programs, and this is relevant to Workforce Pell as well, like once the program gets approved into FastForward and the economic needs of the region shift, can that program then fall off the list? Is there like a normal renewal process? Can programs move on and off the list as the economy shifts?
Yeah, this is a great question as well. So one thing we've observed that over the roughly 10 years since FastForward was launched, or the WCG funding formula was launched, the top high demand fields identified by the state have remained fairly stable. So I think this is really informative because it suggests that even with the strong completion and credential attainment under FastForward, the labor market in many of these fields is still not fully saturated. So there is still very strong employer need for those programs. So the fields of study have been remained fairly consistent. When it comes to specific institutions, what we have been seeing is, it varies across institutions. Most of the institutions, once they have a program already switched to, they have put together a FastForward program, they tend to continue offering that program in that particular fields of study over time. There have been a few instances where the certain programs got offered in certain periods and then stopped being offered. So that could happen. But in our data set, that's really rare. Overall, what we see is a very steady expansion of offering FastForward programs across those 23 institutions across different fields of study. So it's a very clear expansion.
Nice. No, that's good to know. And we just had a couple of people put in the chat that are in the Virginia system that mentioned that, yes, they did have some wraparound services around from childcare to job search. And then also, this is amazing how some of the funds that from FastForward that supported the college, they were able to reinvest into positions like retention coordinators and credential coordinators. So basically providing some of that advising and almost case management like support. So I think that's a fantastic example of reinvesting funds that are generated through one of these types of programs. So how in your research or exploration of this whole non-credit, programming, there are other programs out there like college promise programs that allow access to non-credit programs as well. So how does this compare to those types of programs? And have you seen anything like, are those just as effective or are they less effective because there's that financial incentive in the FastForward program that you mentioned? What have you seen?
This is a great question. I mean, I think those type of programs are quite different in several aspects, right? I think one key difference is, as you alluded to, the performance-based structure of the funding. Many college promise programs are primarily structured to reduce financial barriers and expand access with funding tied to enrollment. But FastForward, in contrast, ties a significant portion of funding to student completion, right? And also to the credential attainment. So that really creates a very strong incentive and accountability, right, to focus on helping students reach that labor market milestone. So I think in terms of the structure, that makes the FastForward program really unique. And the second one is FastForward is very specific, right? It's tied to training in certain type of field, and it's a very strong requirement regarding that you have to design the program in a way that leads to industry credentials. So it has a couple of specific criteria for institutions to keep in mind in designing these programs. So I would say the specific target of the FastForward program is quite different from some of the traditional programs we're seeing in the credit bearing sector.
Nice. So I want to make sure people, as a reminder, if you have a question, we have some questions coming in the Q&A or the chat. I'm monitoring both, so whichever one you feel like using, please feel free to put them in there. One of the questions we have is related to one of the things I was going to ask, so I'm going to ask this now, and then we'll basically go to the chat. So, okay, so there was a low number of students transitioning to the credit-bearing side. So do you know, my question is, what do you think contributes to that? But then the question came in that's related that says, is it possible to see what percentage of FastForward completers gained employment? And is gaining employment a reason that a student would not enter the credit side of the college?
That's a great question. So for the first part of the question, yes, we do see relatively low number of students transitioning into the credit programs after they complete the FastForward program. But I think it's really important to interpret these findings in the context of who these programs are designed to serve and what students are trying to accomplish here. So many FastForward students are adult learners. So the average age of FastForward enrollees is 35. So when we interview them, what's their major goal? Their major goal is to seek a quick pathway into a specific occupation rather than pursuing a long academic degree. So this is just not their primary goal or priority given their, where they are. So based on our qualitative interviews with these students, they often enroll with very clear and immediate goals. So I want to become a certified nursing assistant, and it seems FastForward is very affordable, and it can help me achieve that goal within a very short period of time. And that is why I enroll in the FastForward program. So if that's their career goal, right, the primary goal or intent when they initially enroll the FastForward program, then that the relatively low transition rates into subsequent credit program study may not necessarily indicate a limitation of the program. They may just reflect that the program is successfully serving the intended workforce mission. But that said, there could be students who could potentially benefit from that transition. So I think one important step is help students better understand how their workforce training connects to longer-term educational pathways. Actually, in Virginia, they have a very strong connection into the credit-bearing sector. Like, for example, if you did a welding, there are also welding pathways in the credit-bearing sector, but not many students are fully aware of that pathway. So
Right.
that probably require more proactive reaching to the students to help them understand what are some options there, what could be some benefits and costs, right, associated with those pathways to help them make more informed decisions. Institutions can also help by providing regarding the next steps. Like if students really want to enroll in the credit-bearing sector, there will be matriculation required, specific paperwork requirements. And there has been a long literature suggesting that there could be administrative hurdles that students often encounter during that process. So this suggests that offering advising around the next steps and ensuring students understand how to enroll in the programs, what they need to do, provide concrete support. I think that could potentially be helpful to students who intend to pursue additional training.
Yeah, and just one quick detail about the Fast Forward program.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about that financial incentive, so do the students pay up front and get refunded that third, or do they like
They pay only 1/3, but if they didn't complete the program, they have to pay another third.
so they all pay up front the third.
Exactly. And
Okay.
one thing I didn't have time to go into detail is VCCS also created a lot of financial support to cover that one upfront
I see.
1/3 for students who cannot afford it. So there are
Right.
other like FunTech, I think there are some need-based financial aid
Yes.
that are well aligned with the FastForward and other workforce training in VCCS. So if you meet the income eligibility criteria and if you are enrolled in the targeted programs, a qualified program, then you can get that 1/3 waived. We have also seen many cases where some of the employers might cover that 1/3 of the tuition. So when we are looking at the data and when we are interviewing the students, there is a substantial proportion of FastForward enrollees who didn't pay anything for the enrollment because their 1/3 is covered. And as we see, they all completed the program. So this really testify, how accessible and affordable these FastForward programs are to students.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I had read that and I forgot to mention that around the, because I know I'm sure there was some people thinking that like, okay, well, some of these students can't even afford a third. So there's a way to then sort of overcome that barrier. So that's fantastic. Did you notice there was a question that came in around, did the 2-year credit side degree-based credential programs, was there any sort of feeling of competition, like you're taking students away from the credit side because now this Fast Forward program exists, or was it sort of looked upon as a a potential source of new students into their credit programs?
That's an excellent question. I mean, it's really difficult to causally answer that question that because this program existed, it's attracting students. But based on a number of fronts, we feel this concern is limited in this context. The first one is if you compare, as I briefly mentioned, if you compare the type of students enrolled in FastForward programs versus those who are enrolled in the credit-bearing workforce training CTE programs, they are quite different. So the student population served between those two sectors, they are very different types of students, right? So basically saying those programs are sending different incentives to different types of students. And the second thing is when we are looking at the transfer, right, but from the credit-bearing sector to the FastForward program, if indeed the FastForward program is send so strong incentive and pull a lot of students from the credit-bearing programs, we should expect to see substantial transition or transfer from the credit-bearing sector to the FastForward program, but we didn't see it. So what we do see some students coming from the credit-bearing sector, but the majority of them have stopped out from,
Right. I
enrolling in
see.
those credit-bearing programs for an extended period of time. So these are the students who typically, their current program, they're not making steady progress toward a college-issued degree. They stopped out for a couple of terms, and then they saw those programs, FastForward programs, they seems to be an alternative pathway which might fit better with what they are seeking, and then they enroll in these programs. So we see less of a competition, but more of like complementary services to students who are not receiving credentials in the credit-bearing sector, or who would otherwise not enroll in post-secondary at all.
No, that's great. And that's a great solution or strategy to handle all of those students that either stopped out. So that big population of some college, no degree or no credential type of individual, there's a very viable option in the fast forward model.
Absolutely.
Did you see, and I think you touched on this around the employment of the individuals? I know your research was primarily focused on wages and
Yes.
looking at based on the program they completed. Did
Right.
you look at employment rates?
That's an
And
excellent question. Sorry that you raised that question before and I forgot to answer it. Yes, we did, and it's included in the paper that I
okay,
provide a link to. We started by looking at the employment rate. It's a very small impact, but I think it's reasonable given the population. So remember, those are working adults who are around with an average of 35 years of age.
hmm,
So the vast majority of these individuals, they are already employed before they
right, I
enroll in
see.
the FastForward. So when you are interviewing them, what they are doing, what the FastForward really is helping them is to more switching to a different field.
Right,
I'm
yeah,
currently working in the retail industry. I really want to become a nursing assistant, right? That's
right,
the dominating response from the students. So when you are just comparing in terms of the employment rate, we don't see much of a move. So the employment
I
rate
see.
stayed quite high, right? The majority of the people are employed anyway. The more of the mechanism is really driven by what type of job they are working in, what type of
Right.
positions or what type of industries they are working at.
So less about being employed at all versus employed in the field of study.
Exactly.
And I think so and I think you did, this was a slide in there around the wage. Their wages were tied and depended upon their wage gains and different things were tied to the industry and their credential that it was associated with, correct?
Yes,
Because
yes,
some industries just naturally pay more than others.
exactly. Like public health, right? Welding, those are
Right.
the industries that are associated with relatively higher average earnings. So when the students switch from industries that are associated with a lower average earnings to those targeted fields, they tend to receive higher earnings.
Right, right,
Mhm.
right. So are there any more questions that have come in? I have one more. Um, but I wanted to give the opportunity to the audience to ask anything. So I'll give it a 1 or 2 seconds and then I will ask mine. Don't hesitate. If you ask it when I'm asking mine, that's fine too. But um, so my last question is, so based on the research, it appears that a good number of the students completed the training but did not earn the credential.
Right.
So, talk a little bit about what you think contributed to that and what colleges can do to help students make sure they get the credential.
This is an excellent question. And this is actually a central focus of our ongoing research. We hypothesized a couple of potential factors. One could be students, it's more like an information gap. Students are not
Hmm.
aware of the testing, or they are not aware of the potential benefits of further receiving the credential, right? So that would indicate some potential information related campaign or
Hmm.
to address that gap. Another potential factor could be the administrative hurdles, right? So based on our qualitative work, students sometimes face logistic barriers at that stage, such as access to testing centers,
Hmm.
scheduling challenges, or just needing additional preparation for the testing services. And as we have discussed, the fees. associated with the testing, that could potentially be an important factor when students are considering whether they want to sit in those tests or when to take those tests. So some colleges have already taken steps to address some of those challenges, right? So helping students to know about the testing services nearby. Some of the colleges directly cover the fees, and some of the colleges help students navigate the process. So we are doing a systematic qualitative data collection. Our collaborator MDRC team, they have collected a lot of qualitative interview data from students in terms of all of the hurdles they have encountered during this process and what are the reasons why they haven't taken the tests for the industry credentials. So we are working on analyzing that data. So please stay tuned. I will share the report with you, Steve, once the report is out. Hopefully we can get some insights from the valuable qualitative data, which could lead us to the potential design of interventions down the road to help address those bottlenecks.
No, that's fantastic. And so, Dee, thank you so much. This was such great information. We're getting comments about how awesome it was, and thank you for sharing it. I want to thank Michelle as well for that introduction around what the EERC is doing. I think it's fantastic work as well, so I encourage you to check it out. So again, thanks to all of our panelists for this great information, and thanks to our attendees for joining us today. This is great work. I am very glad we had the opportunity to share it with you. As a reminder, we will be sending out the recording and slide deck to those registered, as well as posting it on our website. And so with that, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.